Today we're going to talk about factoring a quadratic trinomial when the a is bigger than 1. We're looking at this expression. We know that the a is 6 here, which is bigger than 1. So we want to check for a GCF. We do not have one here. Then we want to follow these steps to try to factor. So first we're going to multiply the first and last terms completely. And I'm going to write that term off to the side. So 6x squared times -5 is going to give me -30x squared. First, I'm just going to list the factors of that new term without any negatives in there. I'll analyze those signs afterwards, and we'll put those signs in after we list the factors. Remember that factors are what multiplies together to give me something. So notice here I'm putting 1x times 30x, 2x times 15x, because I need to account for that x squared. Now we're going to analyze those signs that are from the quadratic trinomial. So we remember that the sign at the end tells us that these factors are different signs. That's what gives us that -30x squared. So because the symbol in the middle is a positive number, that number comes from adding two factors together. So if my middle term is positive, that means that the bigger factor is positive and the smaller factor is negative, just like we did with a is equal to 1. Here I'll find the factors that add to the middle term. So -2 plus 15 is what's going to give me that positive 13x in the middle. Here's where we want to rewrite the first and last terms and split the middle term. This process is called split the middle term. So I like to circle my first and last term so I remember that I need to copy those again onto my paper. So I'm going to write 6x squared, and I'm going to rewrite that -5. Then I'm going to write the two terms in the middle that split the middle term, -2x plus 15x. And from here, we can factor by grouping. Remember in class that I said factoring is like a giant pyramid. So if you don't learn the basics, you don't have your building blocks at the bottom. You need to make sure that you remember all those steps from factoring by grouping. And if you don't, then look back in your notes or go watch my video on factor by grouping or factoring out the GCF. So here, remember, we're grouping our factors 2 at a time. We're going to factor out a GCF from both groups. Those pieces on the inside of parentheses should be exactly the same. So notice that I have 2x on the outside times 3x minus 1, and then 5 on the outside times 3x minus 1. Because those two factors on the inside of parentheses are the same, remember that that's called like my big GCF, and whatever's left is my other factor. So that process seems very long, but after you practice it a few times, it won't be so bad. So let's look at this one and follow all the steps. Did you check for a GCF? There is a GCF here. So we can factor out a 3 from each piece. So if I take out a 3, I'm dividing it out. So 9 divided by 3 is 3, and then 66 divided by 3 is 22, and then 21 divided by 3 is 7. So I've factored out a GCF. Then I'm going to multiply the first and last terms, and I'll write that off to the side. So 3k squared times 7 is going to give me 21k squared. Step 2 says to list the factors of that new term. So 1k times 21k, 2 doesn't work, 3k times 7k, 4 doesn't work, 5 doesn't work, 6 doesn't work, and 7 we're right back to the beginning. We've already written all of those factors. Because both of these signs are positive, that means that everything's positive. So we're finding those factors that add to the middle term. We don't need to change any signs here because everything's positive. So 21 plus 1 is what's going to give us 22k. So I'm going to rewrite the first and last terms and split the middle term. So 3k squared plus those split factors, that 1k plus 21k, which adds up to my middle term, and then my 7 at the end. From here, I'll factor by grouping. Now, I can't forget about this 3 in the front, so I'm just going to draw an arrow to bring it all the way down so that I don't forget it in my final answer. When I factor by grouping, I'm grouping those two terms at a time. I'm factoring out a GCF from both groups. So that first group, my GCF is just K, and the second group, my GCF is 7. The things that are inside of the parentheses should be exactly the same. So notice that they're both 3K plus 1 here. When I factor out that big GCF of 3K plus 1, whatever's left is my other factor. So my entire factored form has that 3 out in the front, the 3K plus 1, and the K plus 7. Here's an example for you to try on your own. Pause the video here, come back when you're finished. If you follow the steps, you're going to get this right every time. So notice I multiplied the first and last terms. I'm looking at those signs. The end sign is negative, which means that we have different signs. And the sign in the middle is also negative, which means that the bigger factor is negative here. When I split the middle term, I split it to 5 and negative 20. That's what's going to add up to negative 15. And then I'll factor by grouping. My two factors here are 4n plus 5 and n minus 5. So remember, after you factor out that GCF from both groups, the things that are inside a parenthesis should be the same. That is your big GCF that you're taking out, and whatever's left over is your other factor. This last example is a little shaky. Notice how it starts with a negative, and we have a rule that if our polynomial starts with a negative, we should factor that out. So here we do have a GCF. It is negative 1. So I'll take that negative 1 out of every single factor. Then I'll multiply those first and last terms, and I'll write that off to the side. 6x squared times 25 is going to give me 150x squared. So that's 1 times 150, 2 times 75, and so on. It is super important that you write your x's here so that you don't forget them when you split the middle term. I'll put those in at the very end. From here, I'll rewrite my first and last terms, and then I will split that middle term. So 10x plus 15x is what's going to give me that middle term of 25x. Notice here how I'm keeping that negative that I factored out in the very beginning. From here, I'll factor by grouping. Remember here that you're factoring out a GCF from both groups, and then whatever that big GCF is, we'll take out as one of our factors. We don't want to forget that original negative that we factored out, and we'll have our final two factors at the end. Thanks for coming. Have a great day.